So my number one is Spotlight from 2015, directed by Tom McCarthy, starring Mark Ruffalo, Michael Keaton, Rachel McAdams, whole stack cast. Quick logline: a true story of how the Boston Globe uncovers the massive scandal of child molestation and cover up within the local Catholic archdiocese, shaking the entire Catholic Church to its core. So, despite the grim and serious subject matter of this film, I think to me what this film really stands for from a work ethic standpoint is hard work, getting in the details, no matter what it takes. It's also about teamwork, of
Mm-hmm.
sort of really supporting each other through, what you've really laid out the thing to be, keeping an open mind, because that's where discovery and invention happens. You have to have that mindset, to keep going down that path. It's all of those things that kind of make this movie super powerful. And again, like I said, despite its sort of grim subject matter, it's actually a very watchable movie because it's so powerful and so propulsive. Kind of becomes like an investigatory movie as well, and we'll get into the detail of the movie later. But yeah, from a work ethic standpoint, like I always think of this movie whenever I'm struggling with long work hours or struggling with why are we even doing this. It's this movie I always think about, reminding myself about what the motivation is, what the end
Mm-hmm.
goal is,
Mm-hmm.
and then how do we band as a team together to keep digging, because that's where, no pun intended, the gold is at.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you'd seen this movie before.
Yes, I'd seen it when it came out. I hadn't seen it since, just because honestly, it's a very I find it to be a very hard watch because of the subject
Yeah.
matter. It's such a serious and terrible thing that this not the investigation, but the crimes that were committed
Right.
that this investigation is talking about. So it's still, I think the film still held up a lot to me, and I loved it at the time, and I still like it a lot too. And I think this, you know, newspaper journalist movies, they are great when you talk about work ethic and determination, because there's a lot of shoe leather that goes into real journalism. You're chasing
Hmm.
down leads. Some leads will lead nowhere. Some leads won't. You takes months and sometimes years to close out on a story. And this movie definitely does a great job of showing the dedication you have to be putting in as a journalist to continue to push and push and look and look and look, because you believe there is a story there, and that is definitely an inspiring aspect of the work ethic. And I think what's interesting too in this movie, and we touched on this a little bit, I guess, with the Moneyball as well. It's knowing what your goal is, knowing when you've accomplished it, and then changing your goal potentially halfway through. And there's a lot of sequences in this film where they have enough to publish something about maybe a couple churches or a couple priests, but as they dig deeper, they realize there's something bigger here, and actually we need to leave or set our sights on a larger goal of, instead of
Hmm.
going after these individual parishes or individual priests, we need to go the entire system, because that actually, it goes that deep. And it's knowing when you change your goal, set a new goal, and keep the motivation to move towards a new goal, as opposed to, look, we already did it. We found
Hmm.
this. And there's a lot of great emotional, intense scenes in this film where a lot of these journalists, for a wide variety of reasons, want to I mean, I don't say stop, but start publishing and get the word out there.
Hmm.
And Michael Keaton's character, which again, two Michael Keaton movies, that's interesting in this
Hmm.
podcast. Michael Keaton's character says, no, there's actually a bigger story here. We have to not do anything yet and keep
It's actually
going.
Liev Schreiber who
Oh, that was
really
him that said that?
stresses
Okay.
that.
He was
Yeah.
pressing that. Yeah. And that is something that happens to me a lot in my projects and work. And, your goals are changing and you want to get pushed maybe to do something bigger. And that's a frustrating thing, but it also can be a motivating thing as well, of like the
Hmm.
bigger the goal gets, the more important your work becomes. And I think that was for sure the case here. And as hard as it must have been, and there's a lot of ethical trade-offs, you could call them, in this movie, where I don't know how I would have dealt with those moral dilemmas that a lot of these writers were put into. But at the end goal, I mean, it was one of the more important investigations and stories ever, or at least in the last
Yeah.
100, 200 years. I mean, this had a long standing impact even to this day and worldwide, not just in the local Boston area. So I think that to Liev Schreiber's character's credit, I mean, again, I don't know how this in terms of the real life, I'm sure it was not
Hmm.
exactly like this, but at least in the film, I think he was right to push for that because they accomplished something way bigger by uncovering a scandal that was systematic as opposed to, a couple, bad parishes and bad actors. It was a lot
Right.
bigger than that.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's the big message of the movie, or another big work ethic thing for me. Like you said, the other big work ethic thing, in addition to what we already spelled out, is also about forgiveness in a weird way, and kind of, you know, standing up even though you might have fallen or ignored in the past. So what I mean by
Mm,
that is that this story and, murmurs of it and such actually did hit the Boston Globe previously. In fact, Michael Keaton's character was the one who was sent some material before, and he just didn't act on it. And there could be a variety of reasons for that. They don't really go into that much. But what I love about what happens after is that Leo Schreiber character, not once does he like present judgment
mm-hmm,
or puts Michael Keaton in prison
mm-hmm,
for what he did, because it's about now. It's
mm-hmm,
about, he sees it that, okay, this mistake was made in the past, but now this team is working at it,
mm-hmm.
and my job as a leader is to inspire the team, keep the team focused, and keep them going, as opposed to dwelling on what happened 5 years ago and or however long ago that was. And I think
Right,
that's such a
right.
great work ethic tenant, if you will, from a leadership standpoint, to keep the team focused in that way. And also for the team that, you may be dysfunctional or you may not be on the right path earlier. It doesn't mean you cannot be. You can
Right,
be,
right.
actually, if you find the right chemical balance, if you will, within each other, the right drive and the right set of goals, because it's the same team. They weren't doing this earlier, and they're
Exactly.
galvanized in such a powerful way for the story, because it means something. And I think it goes to show that we're not always the same. Like, context matters, and
Mm-hmm.
leadership matters, and what we're after matters. And as leaders and as team workers, I think it's very hard to do, but you have to try to look at people in a fresh perspective, in a fresh light, on an ongoing basis. So I always take that from this movie as well, because it's so
No.
easy to just brand people off that, oh no, this is not the smart one, or this is the slow team. And
Mhm.
sometimes it might be true, but
Well, just because they were in the past or in the present doesn't mean they
doesn't
can't
mean, yeah,
change, right? And do something better in the future, right? Something, this is a different situation. This is a different
right.
maybe
And also,
story, a
what were
different
you
time.
doing as leader, as a company? Were
Right.
you setting up for success? Were you inspiring them in the right way? Did you have the
Hmm.
right project for them? Maybe not.
No, for sure. And I think that's where Liev Schreier's character, again, I'll just talk about character as opposed, because these are all real people, and I don't know how
Right.
much of this is necessarily true or not, but the importance of a different vision. He has a very specific vision for what the Boston Globe should be focused on, which is investing more in local community issues instead of try to have, run off and cover like the Iraq War or other
Hmm.
things that are going on overseas. No, this is a Boston paper. We need to invest and cover in Boston things. And maybe that was potentially the reason why several years ago, when they had just a small story, they weren't really focused on as much local issues. Obviously, this became much bigger than just a Boston story, but it started out as a Boston story. And I think that was the he had specific goals that was motivating his team to be like, no, we want to focus on spotlight. We want to focus on local stories, which this was. And that does make a difference of leadership, I think, is what he was pushing for. And then everyone else responds in kind to that. They have new motivation, and that is what's driving them to get this story out there and to do all the hard legwork and
Hmm.
shoe leather that it needs to get to a story like this. I mean, especially when you're fighting against institutions of like the church and city government. And in Boston, the church is very, very important culturally to folks
Hmm.
that live there, especially the Catholics. So it's not an easy thing to go after, and they're being told no and doors slamming their face throughout the entire film. And it is inspiring that these people actually put the effort in and had that work ethic and the right leadership and all these things to uncover a very important story.
Yeah, I've watched this movie many, many times. As hard of a watch it is,
Hmm.
for that inspiration and the power of it, and then also how the movie is put together. I think from Earth,
Fantastic.
he did
Yeah.
such an amazing job. Like,
Hmm.
this becomes a procedural. The performances are amazing. The
Hmm.
score, the editing, like it just flies by. You're gripped by this from the very beginning. And a movie that could have just had a very different tone given the
Mm-hmm.
subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
It just handles so deftly. As heartbreaking and devastating the victims' portrayals are in the movie, they are handled so carefully and deftly and thoughtfully. And even those people, their performances are so good. They just have one scene and they're absolutely incredible. But the thing I was going to say was that after watching this movie many times, for the first several times, it was always about the actual team, Ruffalo, the other guy, I forget his name, Tucci, Rachel McAdams. Like, it was these people that I would think about. But as I watched the movie more and more, it's Leah Schreiber who I think about more, actually, because
Mm-hmm.
he's also an outsider. He's Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
He's not even from Boston, actually.
Correct.
So that's
Right.
sort of the
Right.
other amazing thing that's happening from a work ethic standpoint, is that you are a total outsider, and he doesn't play the game, if you will. He's
Mm-hmm.
totally different. He's not hobnobbing with the local powers that be to make an impression. He's just about the work.
Right.
And I find that so refreshing as well. So yeah, it's funny like how over time this movie to me has become like a Leah Schreiber
Interesting.
MVP movie.
Interesting. Yeah, I know that can happen, especially the more times you see a film, and as you get older and your perspective shifts on
Yeah.
your own life, it shifts on films. I guess there's one thing I need to caveat or mention, I guess, because this is a movie in Boston, and
Yeah.
I grew up in Boston. That I have to say these Boston accents are terrible, as they always are in every
uh
movie, especially Michael Keaton. It was just hard to.
uh
Again, the Boston accent is one of the hardest accents you can do, and there's
but
very few
Goodwill
actors,
Hunting
and
is fine, no?
well, that's because they were Bostonians. Like
Right.
Matt and Ben could go into that, right? Because they grew
Right.
up there. But when actors kind of come in that were not in that era, so not to pick on Keaton
Bahaba.
too. Sorry, yeah, there you go.
Bahaba.
Yeah, yeah. It's just it's sometimes it takes me a while to kind of get over that when I'm watching like a Boston movie. I'm like, just don't try it. Just don't try to do the accent, and then I can kind of enjoy it. So I just as a Bostonian or someone who grew up in Boston, I just wanted to say the accents are not good. But the
Aw.
film is fantastic, and again, it held up. Hadn't seen it since it was out, and I think it's just a great film. And actually, in a way, this is obviously a very horrible and tragic topic that they're dealing with, and they found an angle into the story where it's like a positive. The only positive
Mhm.
version of the story you could tell is the journalists that were able to do the job to get the story out there and then start
Mhm.
enacting change. And, it's similarly with like Schindler's List. Like Spielberg picked the one positive aspect of the Holocaust that is an uplifting version of that horrible,
Mhm.
horrible event, in the same way that this film too, I mean, could have been a lot more focused on the awful acts that were taking place, which I'm not saying you shouldn't make films about that too, but it would be a much, much harder watch than
Oh
this. It
yeah.
is at least inspiring and moving because of the work that they did. It makes it a little easier to watch, even though again it's very difficult for me to see this film just because of what it deals with.
Yeah. No, totally.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.